What would you do if the sun ceased to be a source of life and became the taskmaster of your open-air prison? If your name was erased and your identity reduced to a brand on your skin, turning you into just another tool, as disposable as a worn-out bronze chisel? Imagine. Feel the scorching heat of the quarry sand sticking to your sweaty skin, a blanket of fire that never leaves you. Listen. It is the incessant echo of hammers striking stone, a hellish and monotonous rhythm that does not stop from dawn to dusk. It is the soundtrack to your existence. Smell. It is the granite dust that fills your lungs with every breath, a dry and suffocating mix of earth, exertion, and despair. Feel the dull, deep ache in your back as you drag a block of stone whose weight seems to contain all the indifference of the universe, a pain that becomes a part of you. This is not a literary invention for a Hollywood film. This was the calculated, anonymous, and brutal existence of thousands of human beings who were the forgotten engine of history's most enduring empire. What you are about to hear is not the story of the pharaohs and their golden tombs. It is the chronicle of the hands that carved those tombs from the living rock. We are going to venture into the darkness of the quarries and mines to discover the true, and often ignored, life of a slave in ancient Egypt. First, we must demolish the greatest myth of all, a myth etched into our imagination by cinema. Slaves did not build the Great Pyramids of Giza. Archaeology has spoken, and its verdict is clear. The tombs found next to the pyramids belonged to Egyptian workers, free men and women. Their skeletons show the bones of a hard life, yes, but they were buried with honor, near the monument they helped to erect. Papyri like the Diary of Merer, a foreman who worked on the Pyramid of Khufu, detailed the logistics of a skilled workforce organized into teams who received rations of bread, beer, and fish. They were builders, not slaves, working for their king for a wage and a sense of civic pride. So, if they were not there, where were the slaves? To find them, we must travel in time, far from the Old Kingdom, to the imperial height of Egypt, the New Kingdom. We are between the years 1550 and 1070 BC. This is the Egypt of the great warrior pharaohs, Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt, and Rameses II, the Great. Their armies did not just defend the borders, they expanded them. They marched south into Nubia, west into Libya, and northeast into the Levant. And from these military campaigns, they returned with more than just gold and tribute. They returned with tens of thousands of prisoners of war, men, women, and children torn from their homes, who became the empire's main source of forced labor. Egyptian slavery was not based on race. A Nubian could be a high-ranking officer in the pharaoh's army, and an Egyptian could fall into servitude through debt. It was based on status. A slave, a hem, was considered property. They could be bought, sold, rented, or inherited, like a donkey or a chair. Alongside them existed an even larger class of state-dependent laborers, the Baku. They were not property, but they were tied for life to a job or institution, with very little freedom. Our journey, however, will focus on the captives of war, the state-owned hem, those who fell to the lowest rung of society and faced the most inhuman conditions. No one was born a slave in their own land. Slavery was not a natural state. It was a fall, a violent and brutal fracture in the course of a life that, until that moment, had been normal. Imagine a village in distant Nubia, south of the first cataract of the Nile. Life flows to the rhythm of the river and the seasons. Suddenly, chaos, the cry of the watchman, the pharaoh's soldiers with their leather shields and bronze axes burst into your home. You smell the smoke of burning huts. You hear the screams of your neighbors, your family. They tie your hands behind your back with a rough palm rope that tears your skin. You are bound to a long line of other captives. The march begins. For days, weeks, you walk north under a relentless sun, leaving behind forever the only world you have ever known. The final destination is one of the great cities of Egypt, perhaps the capital, Thebes. There, the humiliation is total. You are paraded through the streets as a living trophy, proof of the pharaoh's power, before the curious and indifferent gaze of the crowd. Prisoners of war were the main source of slaves, but not the only one. If an enslaved woman had a child, that child automatically inherited her status. Egyptian criminals could also be sentenced to forced labor in the harshest conditions, especially in the desert mines. And of course, there was trade, the importation of human beings from distant lands. Once in Egypt, your transformation into property was formalized. A scribe recorded your entry into the inventories of the state or a temple. He noted your origin and perhaps a skill. Then came the pain of the hot iron, a brand on your shoulder or chest that marked you forever as the property of your new master. But the deepest blow was not physical, it was psychological. You lost your family, your tongue became useless, your gods had abandoned you, and finally, they took your name. You were assigned a new, simple, and generic Egyptian name. It was the final act of erasure. The man or woman you once were died on the road. What remains is a tool with a new name, ready to be used until it breaks. For the vast majority of these state slaves, life was reduced to a single place, an open-air hell from which there was no escape. The quarry or the mine. Visualize the granite quarry of Aswan or the limestone quarry of Tura. The midday sun reflects off the rock with a blinding intensity. The air is still, heavy, and the heat is so suffocating it seems to steal your breath. The sound is a constant, deafening cacophony. Thousands of hammers striking stone, the screeching of wooden sledges dragging multi-ton blocks, the shouts of the foreman, and above all, the dust. A fine, abrasive dust that sticks to your sweaty skin, that gets into your eyes, your mouth, your lungs. You see the bodies around you, gaunt men, their skin darkened by the sun and furrowed with scars. They move with the slowness of extreme exhaustion. Thirst is a constant torment. Water is strictly rationed. How did they cut these giant blocks of granite, one of the hardest rocks in the world? There was no advanced technology. There was one primary tool, the human body, applied en masse and without mercy. They used heavy balls of dolerite and even harder rock to pound and pulverize the granite's surface, creating a trench around the desired block. It was incredibly slow and exhausting work. Once the base was isolated, they inserted dry wooden wedges into the cracks. Then, they poured water on them. The wood swelled slowly, with immense force, until, with a thunderous groan, the stones split. Danger was a constant companion. Sunstroke and dehydration were common. A slipping block of stone could crush a dozen men in an instant. There were no doctors for you. A serious injury was a death sentence. Here, in the quarry, dehumanization was total. You did not matter. Your pain did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the daily quota of stone that had to be extracted. Your life was objectively less valuable than the granite block you worked on, because that block was destined for the eternity of a temple. You were not. Life expectancy in this place was measured in months, not years. Now let's change perspective. Let's leave the dust and sweat of the quarry and ascend to the terrace of a temple under construction in Karnak. Here, in the shade, stands a high-ranking architect or scribe. He looks down at the ramp where hundreds of men are dragging an obelisk, but he does not see men. He sees resources. On his papyrus scroll, his mind works with the cold logic of mathematics. He calculates, to erect this obelisk, I need 5,000 man-days of labor. He notes, allocate 2,000 jars of low-quality beer and 4,000 ration loaves for the workforce of Sector 7. When a foreman informs him that 3 workers have been crushed to death, he feels no sorrow. He feels annoyance. It is a logistical problem. He strikes 3 names from his list and notes, requests 3 replacement units from the Nubian prisoner camp. For him, the suffering taking place beneath his gaze is an abstraction, a necessary and accepted cost to achieve a higher goal, the divine glory of the pharaoh and the manifestation of Egypt's eternity in stone. This is the bureaucracy of cruelty, an impersonal, efficient, and terribly organized cruelty. The end of the workday brought no relief. It only brought a change of scenery and misery, a brief pause before the cycle began again with the next day's sun. Imagine the workers' camp at dusk. It is a labyrinth of low huts built of mud brick and thatched roofs, overcrowded to the limit. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, disease, and the hopelessness of hundreds of exhausted bodies. The time for rations arrives. You stand in a long line to receive your daily sustenance. It is not much. A flat, thick loaf of coarse barley bread, a few raw onions, perhaps a piece of dry, salted fish, and the beer. Not the fine beer the nobles drink, but a thick, sour brew, more like a liquid porridge. But it is crucial. It is your main source of calories, and most importantly, safer than the river water. The food is not designed for enjoyment. It is calculated to give you the minimum energy required to return to work the next day. Nothing more. Sanitary conditions are non-existent. There are no latrines, and diseases like dysentery spread rapidly, taking the weakest. You have no privacy, no possessions, save for the rags that cover your body. There is no family life. Your only asset is your own body, and not even that belongs to you. How does one survive in such a place? How does one maintain sanity when everything around you is designed to break you? Perhaps in the small acts of humanity. Perhaps in the moment you share a sip of your water ration with a comrade who has collapsed. Or at night, when an old man whispers in your native tongue a story of your lost home, a memory of who you were before this. Fleeting moments that remind you that, despite the brand on your skin and the Egyptian name forced upon you, you are still human. Not all slavery was the brutality of the quarry. There was another face, often hidden behind the walls of the luxurious villas of the nobles in Thebes. Let's change the scene again. You are now a domestic slave. Perhaps a young Syrian girl captured in a military campaign, valued for her exotic beauty. Your life is, on the surface, infinitely better. You sleep under a solid roof, you eat the leftovers from your masters, banquets, you wear clean linen tunics, but you live in a gilded cage. Your existence is defined by constant proximity to your owners. You are under perpetual surveillance. Your duties are to serve food, attend to the children, clean the rooms, play a musical instrument to entertain guests. Physically, the work is less demanding. Psychologically, it is draining. Proximity to power means a constant risk of abuse. A dropped plate can mean a beating. A wrong word can bring punishment. And for women, sexual abuse by the master of the house was a constant threat and an accepted reality, against which they had absolutely no defense. Your entire life depends not on rules or laws, but on the mood and whim of your owner. One day you might be his favorite. The next you could be sold or sent to the mines for a trivial offense. This form of slavery, though less lethal to the body, was often just as destructive to the spirit. Even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit seeks light. Even in the most desperate situation, the flame of resistance, however faint, flickers. Imagine the night in the desert. The camp sleeps under an indifferent moon. You decide to risk everything. You have no plan, only the instinct to run. You slip out of the hut, your heart hammering in your chest. The silence is absolute. Every step you take seems to echo in the vastness. The stars are your only map, the desert cold your only companion. Escape was the most common and most dangerous form of resistance. The desert was a formidable enemy, and the border patrols were efficient. If you were caught, the punishment was exemplary. They would cut off your nose and ears to mark you as a fugitive, or sentence you to a slow death in the mines. But still, many tried. There were other, more subtle ways to resist. Sabotage. Deliberately damaging a tool, knowing it would delay the work. Working at a slower pace, feigning more exhaustion than you felt. Small acts of defiance that gave you back a shred of control over your own life. And perhaps the most important resistance was cultural. In secret, at night you kept your beliefs alive. You prayed to your own gods, not those of your captors. You sang the songs of your homeland in whispers. It was an act of defiance to preserve the core of your identity, to remind yourself that you were more than a slave. Liberation, manumission, was possible in ancient Egypt, but it was extremely rare for state-owned slaves. Your only hope was not for a better life. For many, the only hope was for a better death. To the Egyptian mindset, a proper burial was absolutely crucial to reaching the afterlife. The greatest tragedy for a slave was not just their suffering in life, but knowing their body would be discarded, denying them any chance of an hereafter. The final fate for the vast majority of slaves in ancient Egypt was the same: absolute anonymity, a total oblivion, both in life and, crucially, in death. Picture the final scene. A man, whose Nubian name is lost forever, collapses under the quarry sun. Dehydration and exhaustion have finally won. No one runs to help him. They do not carry him to the shade or give him water. The foreman simply ordered 2 other slaves to drag him to the side of the path, so his inert body does not obstruct the work of hauling the next block of stone. His death is not a tragedy. It is a logistical inconvenience. At the end of the day, his body is taken with the others who have died and is thrown into a common grave in the desert sand. No ceremony, no name, not a single object to accompany him on his journey to the afterlife. Contrast that fate with that of the pharaoh for whom he toiled, a pharaoh whose death was the beginning of an elaborate 70-day ritual, whose body was mummified with the finest oils and wrapped in the finest linen, whose golden sarcophagus was placed in a magnificent tomb, filled with treasures for eternity, and most importantly, whose name was inscribed thousands of times on the walls to be remembered and spoken forever. One was destined for eternity, the other for oblivion. This is the central irony and the final tragedy of their existence. They built monuments designed to last forever, yet they themselves were made to be utterly forgotten. Imagine you are standing before the Colossi of Memnon at dawn. You feel their greatness, their eternal power. But now, look beyond the stone. Imagine the thousands of anonymous ghosts swirling at their base. The Nubian prisoner of war, the indebted peasant, the condemned criminal. Their names are not in any hieroglyph. Their only monument is the silent pain embedded in every inch of that stone. The true story of Egypt is written not just on papyrus and tomb walls, but in the glaring absence of those who made it all possible. The glory of their empire teaches us an uncomfortable lesson, that the greatest achievements of civilization often demand a human price that history prefers not to record. The slaves did not build the pyramids, but they built the empire that allowed the pyramids to be remembered. After learning the difference between myth and reality, what do you find more tragic? The physical brutality they suffered in the quarries, or the fact that their sacrifice has been completely erased from popular history? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this journey into the shadow of the pharaohs has moved you, subscribe. Here, we don't just tell history, we relive it.